My fourth chapter on my research, I had presented about the international forums which related to domestic violence. So here, even internationally, it's a distinguishing between different sorts of violence is difficult, but vital in situations. So the word domestic violence covers a wide range of issues. With the extension of a few minor harms, it is critical to comprehend and acknowledge that the concept of systematic intimate violence within the family, that is qualitatively and constitutes as an ever present negative effect on the society. Now, when we talk about this particular aspect of grievous bodily injury and attempted murder, rape, and several assault, torture, and ill treatment, and other crimes necessitates a global reaction as well as a review of national legal system through the lens of international law. Now, it includes violence that infringes on the woman's not only physical, emotional, and bodily autonomy in a way that it is especially damaging to the victim's dignity. Therefore, systemic intimate violence within the four walls of the family and between inmates consists of five aspects. So yes, when we talk about the five aspects, which is as we said previously also, the victims have suffered significant mental or physical trauma or has been threatened. Very important over here is the threatening. Yeah, it happens often. So the underlying idea is that everyone has to stake in maintaining that is their physical autonomy as well as fundamental right to be fearless. International treaties, declarations, and other international instruments to as well as many governments, constitutional and local systems reflect this. It's different. It is very difficult to access the seriousness of violence. Yes, it's very difficult to access the seriousness of violence, and that is conducted in a private place in order to deterrence, in order to determine human conscience, despite the fact that it occurs in a context of love, closeness, and domesticity. The severity of the harm, according to the European Court of Human Rights, very, very important over here. The severity of the harm, according to the European Human Rights Court of Human Rights, is determined by all of the facts of the case, including the type and type and context of the treatment, its duration, and the bodily and mental repercussions determines, as well as the victim's sex, age, and state of health. The guilt of the accused must be determined, not by the the grief or whatever the torture. So finally, we have also seen that yes, procedures. In my concluding conclusion regarding this, again the difficulty of identifying such sneaks in making it the difficulty that is insufficiently substantial to require hospitalization, police involvement, or proof in court procedure. So, the severity of the harm, according to the European Court of Human Rights, is determined by all of the facts of the case, including the type and the context of the treatment, its duration, and the bodily and mental repercussions. So, as well as the victim's sex, age, and state of the health. Yes, of course. Secondly, the false idea that violence is not serious and expressive because it is performed in private by a non-state official and typical in the context of a relationship must be abandoned. When a victim suffers a long-term physical and emotional harm as a result of the state's failure to offer effective police intervention and basic shelters to help minimize the repercussions, the state can and should be held liable. Very important aspect over here, where a victim suffers long term physical or emotional harm as a result of the state's failure to offer effective police interventions and basic shelters to help minimize the repercussions, the state can and should be liable, as I mentioned above. A victim's experience of violence over time rather than a single incident, acts of violence may become serious and debilitating if they create an outgoing environment of fear and control from which the victim is unable to escape. Emotional and physical trauma may occur individually, but they are frequently linked to create a web of abuse in which the need for violence grows. So, in our research, when we found that domestic violence legislation in several countries has recognized the ongoing nature of systematic interpersonal violence of various degrees. Yes, number three, violence perpetrated primarily by men against women in intimate relationship. This is yes, very prominent to note that it's increasing. It's increasing day by day. As I said earlier, modernization has led to industrialization. Industrialization has led to the opening up of the world economy, and we can see men and women both working together in close proximity. So the concept of marriage has also changed worldwide. Now, yes, about the intimate relationships, the victims and the society's understanding of the violence. Here, her capacity to flee and society's attitude to her experience are all distorted by the intimate relationship between the woman and the respondent. So, domestic violence is distinguished from other forms of violence in society by the feature. So, domestic violence is shredded in shame in our society. So, recurrent violence becomes accepted, and as a result of being and that is in the society within the relationship, preventing the abused from reporting it and authorities from negotiating it. Therefore, this causes women's vulnerability. Now, the victim, that is the woman, fourth, the victim, that is the woman, is a part of vulnerable group that is susceptible to vulnerability, which is exacerbated by the society misunderstanding of the nature of the violence and yes, perpetrated, resulting in victims' isolation. Very, very important over here. This act of violence which she undergoes, it results in victim isolation. Traditional roles of course, hegemony between the man and the woman, the private nature of systems violence within the four corners of the family, that is restraining women's freedom and the acquiescence of women's community to the violence are aggregating factors. Now, that this contributes to women's vulnerability, equal treatment by the state, and access, and this necessitates equal protection from violence where it occurs most frequently, namely in private spaces. Well, of course, the fifth one is the government's failure to assist these victims. This happens often because as I said in my earlier chapters, the pillars we say of our nation, that is the judiciary, the legislation, and the police. The violence is systematic in the sense that it occurs in a society where the state in question has failed to meet the standards that would in the prevention of such violence. Now, deficient police services, very important, deficient police services, inaccessible or inefficient court processes, poor health care services, a lack of economic and in the form of welfare systems, very very important, or laws are all examples of failures, because the nature of the hurt committed is silenced. The harm is effectively removed from the realm of reality. The abuse or the violence ceases to exist in the eyes of the state. Yes, it is predominant to note in my research also the state's systematic failure to protect the victims immediately of severe interpersonal violence and prospective perpetrations, and is an implicit or explicit endorsement of the suffering. As a result of its reluctance to act, the state's behavior fosters the violence, creating an atmosphere of course, impunity to international law. The state's role is triggered in the manner. Now, when we will be continuing in my next video the women's human rights and international laws, continuing with my fourth chapter of my thesis, which involves various aspects of international law related to women and violence, and then we will be comparing what happens in India, specifically in my two regions of research, that is Rajasthan and Maharashtra. So coming to my case on this particular topic, of where even internationally we have to deal with cases where at times the victim was in India, and thereafter she had to go away to some country. So there it happens a lot of violations in our country take place, and therefore they feel that they are better safe in another country. So these are some of the what I found in my cases and in my research. So I will be tabulating this particular cases also at the end of my chapters. Thank you.